Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The pandemic has really shown how fragile supply chains can be. Around the world, supply chain challenges have seen empty shelves in shops and customers waiting far longer than usual for major purchases like cars. Increasingly, companies are turning to technology for the answer and are looking to future-proof their supply chains. Relex Solutions is a supply chain technology company founded in Finland in 2005. Relex is now making waves globally, including Australia, where they recently signed an agreement with Coles to automate reordering of fresh produce. Johanna Småros is the co-founder and CMO of Relex and joins me this morning from Finland. Johanna, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you, Sean.
How is Helsinki? I've never been there. Going into winter, I suppose.
Helsinki is fantastic. So it's actually not all that different from, for example, Sydney. You can go to places using ferries. It's slightly different from a climate perspective, but I think it would be a nice change for many Australians.
Okay, so how did you get a company in Finland get involved in one of our biggest supermarkets, Coles? Where did that introduction come?
Yeah, I think it's based on many years of hard work and kind of making a name for ourselves, especially in the retail supply chain business. So it wasn't an overnight success, as most things aren't. But I'm really happy that we are now making waves in Australia, as you said.
Okay, so how does your technology work?
So basically, we do demand forecasting at the core. So we use machine learning to capture the impact of seasons, trends, weekdays, holidays, promotions, price changes, even local weather. Mm-hmm. So, for example, for a big home improvement retailer that we work with, this means that we continuously keep more than 4 billion forecasts updated. And then we use this demand forecast to figure out what stock they will need in each part of their supply chain at any given day, typically more than a year ahead, and automate reordering. So, for example, a German drugstore retailer, a client of ours that has about 2,000 stores, has managed to fully automate store replenishment.
Wow.
So no human intervention needed to keep the store stocked. And at the same time, they managed to reduce stockouts by 85%. So that's pretty fantastic.
Yeah. And so it's artificial intelligence based?
Yeah, we use lots of different kinds of AI, but the machine learning we use for demand forecasting is a good example of that.
Okay, so let's take an example. At Coles, you're using fresh produce. Let's say it's apples. The number of apples sold presumably depends on everything from promotions to the weather to what other fresh produce is available sitting next to the apples, whether it's strawberries or oranges or whatever. It's all those sorts of things that you can combine into an algorithm to actually know in 3 months' time or a month's time or whatever, how many apples will be sold at Coles, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And for example, when we talk about produce, you also have to look at the supply side of things. Uh-huh. So you may not necessarily get exactly the same product throughout the year because there's growing seasons, there's quality differences, there's size differences. So there's also quite a lot of work in kind of making sure that you get the proper product in the proper store and the proper mix of, for example, green, yellow bananas in different stores.
Yep. Now, I don't think the world has ever, certainly in Australia, we have never focused on supply chain issues as much as we are right now, from semiconductor chips to new cars to just stocking everyday goods on the shelves because of the pandemic and because of transport costs, all sorts of things. Really broadly, this automated supply chain, what are the really big benefits in an environment like today?
Yeah, so even in a kind of a stable situation, there's quite a lot of benefits to be had. So better on-shelf availability, less waste, less obsolescence cost, more efficient transportation, basically just increased efficiency in the kind of whole supply chain. But now the pandemic has really kind of hammered in how important automation is when there's shocks to the system. So when you have visibility and control over the supply chain, it's a lot easier to adjust to changes effectively. So for example, we have a Swiss online grocery client that was just kind of running out of capacity as online orders surged. And they were able to use the system to level out the inbound and outbound goods flows from their warehouse to be able to fulfill more customer orders.
Okay. And in many ways, it doesn't matter where the produce comes in terms of using the Relex IP. Certainly in Australia, there's a push away from just in time to ensuring you have stock available. So you could use that software in any case. Has it changed much given that many companies in Australia are certainly pushing away from just in time?
I think there is a definite need for just in time. So when we talk about short shelf life products, freshness is an important goal, and that's something we value as consumers. But then in other parts of the supply chain, it's more sensible to go for stocking at the right locations to give you a bit of buffer to be able to react to changes, but also to kind of increase how well you can, for example, fill your trucks to make it more sustainable.
Okay. Stay with me, Johanna. We'll be back in a minute. I'm talking to Johanna Småros, co-founder of Relex Solutions. One of the trends that we're talking a lot about here is quick commerce, the idea that households are shifting away from doing one big weekly grocery shop to doing many small ones. Certainly in my household, I would go to the grocery store 3 or 4 times a week minimum. Mind you, we're in lockdown, so maybe it's just a trip out of the house. But the idea that we are doing sort of more smaller shops rather than a weekly or fortnightly big shop, are you seeing this trend anywhere else? Or are you seeing that as a trend globally?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing this in Europe, in the Americas, also in Asia. And I'd say quick commerce is more than a trend. So the leading companies, like, for example, our client Delivery Hero, are already generating billion-dollar revenues while continuing to grow fast.
Okay. Were you seeing that in the supermarket space, I suppose, is what I'm wondering?
Yeah, so there's both the kind of pure play quick commerce players that are establishing their own dark stores or delivery only supermarkets. But then there are also established supermarket chains that are partnering with other companies or sometimes putting up their own kind of network of dark stores to serve clients faster.
Okay. So supply chains, I think supply chains are really interesting. I used to work in one of the big publishers here, and the whole supply chain of getting a newspaper back then, the hardest part was that last mile, actually getting it from the printing press to the front yard was always the supply chain. That was the choke point, I suppose. Are certain supply chains a lot more complex than others?
I would say all supply chain have their own intricacies. So, for example, long lead times, when you have, for example, international supply chains, are always vulnerable to things changing between when you place the order and when you actually get it. But then on the other hand, for example, one of our US home improvement clients needs to plan and react to hurricane damage.
Wow.
So that's kind of an interesting known unknown.
Yeah.
And then, for example, we have a bookstore client that makes about a fourth of their annual revenue in sales in 3 weeks leading up to Christmas. So they really need to nail their holiday inventory. So there's just lots of things to consider in supply chains.
Johanna, you've used a bunch of examples. Whereabouts do you operate? It sounds like Relex is a very international company.
Yeah, we are indeed a global company nowadays. And the interesting thing is that there are local challenges, but also pretty kind of similar global challenges. And for example, in the pandemic, when we saw panic buying by consumers in lots of different markets, everyone was rushing for the same items. So toilet paper was a big hit across the world.
So that wasn't just in Australia, that was around the world. Everyone seemed to stock up on toilet paper.
Indeed, yes.
Right. Okay, so is Coles your first client in Australia?
It's not our first client in Australia, but I think it's the one that made the headlines because just the kind of sheer size of the operation. We also work with companies like, for example, Baby Bunting
Yep.
In Australia.
Okay. And so do you plan to expand into this region, Australia, Asia Pacific region?
Yeah, well, actually, Asia Pacific is currently our fastest growing market. And I'm happy to say that we opened an office in Melbourne this year. And I have to tell you, Australia has such a fantastic brand. So when we announced that there was an opportunity for very skilled employees to relocate to Australia, there was huge excitement. So now we have a stellar team of seasoned Relexians and knowledgeable locals on the ground.
Relexans, is that what you call yourselves?
Yep.
That is very high tech.
We are very relaxed Relexians.
Exactly. Johanna, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed all the way from Helsinki this morning.
Thank you, Sean.
That was Johanna Småros, co-founder of Relex Solutions. This is a Fear and Greed daily interview. Join me every morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast with all the business news you need to know. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.